Well, we have an opportunity on the California ballot right now, this time, which is to vote for redistricting reform. One of the reasons things are so partisan right now is my race is probably an exception to this rule, but most of this congressional races and state legislative races in California are not competitive because the districts have been designed to be either safe Republican or safe Democrat. So the only election you have of any consequence is the first one. And then the incumbent stays there for the term limit he has. He has no, and it causes two problems. One is that safe seats tend to be won in the primary, favoring the more extreme candidate. So conservatives win Republican primaries, Democrats win or liberals win the Democratic primaries. And then it sends to the state legislature and Congress the more extreme ends of both parties, not a wide panorama, which would be the real electorate. There's wide differences on ideology. And the second thing it does is it takes away a very important incentive for politicians to stay in touch with their constituents. Because once they win that first election, they don't have any trouble winning the next one. And they don't really have to work very hard to keep their seat. And I think the best thing we can do to curb blatant partisanship in the country is to have competitive districts for Congress, and that means designing them more towards their community of interest. Now, Stockton and San Joaquin County are obvious examples of this. We've been cut up like a pig out of luau, and there's actually a possibility that this great city that we live in, which is over 300,000 people, and our county, which is about the size of a congressional district, if the elections go the wrong way, we could have no state assemblyman, no state senator, and no congressman that reside in San Joaquin County. So anyway, that's more than you asked, but I think that's the best answer. And also, voters are clearly demanding from people like me when I go around and walk door to door, do neighborhood get-togethers. A lot of people are recoiling against partisanship. And so the voters themselves are playing a role in pushing back on that idea. And because of that, I go out of my way not to be partisan in my approach to voters. Well, it's an absolute mess. And it's such a great example of Washington incompetence and corruption. I can't, it would take more than the time we have here to go through every item in it. But let me give you an example that wasn't, I read your editorial on it and I agree with it, but let me give you another example. Buried within both of the bailout bills, and that's what this is, it's a bailout. It's not a rescue. Matter of fact, the evidence is already in. The market didn't respond favorably to the bill. So it's $700 billion that didn't work. And there was a better alternative to stabilize the credit markets and provide liquidity to banks. And we can get to that if you like. But let me give you an example. In the first bill, the one that failed in the House of Representatives, which was less costly than the one that actually ended up passing, there was a provision in there, I think it's I read the whole bill, but it's section 122, I believe, and it increases the public debt ceiling by $1.3 trillion. Arguably, to make the bill work, you have to raise the debt ceiling to the amount of the bailout, $700 billion. But there was absolutely no reason to increase the public debt ceiling from $700 billion to 1.3 trillion unless you just wanted to spend more money. And so now Congress is going to be, because we had a crisis and because there was a rush to judgment and because there was this big opportunity, they went in and they gave themselves more spending authority. And that's a $500 million plus increase in government spending when we can't afford it. And so there are provisions of the bill that I like. I like increasing the FDIC insurance from $100,000 to $250,000. I think that does help stabilize, especially small banks. But this is a big mess, and it didn't work. And the alternative that was fairly obvious, which was to give the Federal Reserve more discount window authority. And the discount window is where the Federal Reserve lends at a discount rate to banks all over the country. They do this every day and have done for 50 years. It's a way to provide liquidity for the banks while they have non-performing assets. And a lot of capital is moving, in every bank, capital is moving from the capital account to the net loss reserve account because their collateral on their loans is being appraised lower. So even if the loans are performing well, and you have a good bank, and we have several examples in our local area, even if the bank is performing well and their loans are performing well, they aren't able to lend as much because their capital is moving to the net loss reserve. Someday it will come back out again. But the answer to that liquidity crisis is to allow the Federal Reserve, which is not a political agency, to do this. I am absolutely opposed to giving a Treasury Secretary who is an investment banker and the Bush administration a huge amount of money to pick winners and losers in the marketplace. It's a recipe for corruption, and I think we're going to find out in the 6 months forward that this was not a good idea and that there was a much better alternative for stabilizing the credit markets. Well, they already passed the stimulus bill, so it's a fait accompli. And like you say, it didn't work. And it's not likely to work in an economy of trillions of dollars, providing short-term relief from the government. It usually doesn't work. I think what we have is fundamental economics in play. We have a glut of cars. We have a glut of homes for sale. We have too much supply. And it's so remarkable when I've walked 20 precincts this summer. And because of the heat and the amount of ground I covered, I lost 13 pounds. And one of the things I learned door to door is that ordinary people, average working people, understand supply and demand better than Washington does. They know through their own eyes, they can see it. And they can see that there's too many homes for the amount of buyers. And whenever you have that imbalance, supply goes up higher than demand, you're going to have lower prices and economic decline. Supply goes up higher than demand, or supply goes down lower than demand, you're going to have higher prices and economic growth. The government cannot change that basic principle. No matter how much money they throw at it, they can provide short-term relief, and I do think they should do something about the credit markets. But throwing money at that sort of thing is not going to change the imbalance between supply and demand, which every kid learns in basic economics in high school. And I think until we will eat up that supply, the home market will come back, cars will be sold again, but until we bridge that gap between supply and demand, these government aid programs are unlikely to help.